Well, they helped us preview the hearing yesterday on Morning Rush, and now they're joining us once again with their reaction and to help us kind of dissect everything that did happen yesterday afternoon. Rina Shah, CEO of Relax Strategies and a GOP strategist who has served on 2 Republican congressional staffs, and Nicole Brenner-Schmitz, a political consultant for MBS Strategies and a former Democratic legislative aide in the House of Representatives. Rina and Nicole, thank you so much for coming back. We really appreciate you guys analyzing this from different kind of viewpoints. So, of course, we'll start with you, Rina. The committee unanimously voted to subpoena Donald Trump yesterday and had some rather strong language about requiring testimony for the investigation. Let's listen.
He's required to answer for his actions. He's required to answer to those police officers who put their lives and bodies on the line to defend our democracy. He's required to answer to those millions of Americans whose votes he wanted to throw out as part of his scheme to remain in power.
Now, I think it's safe to say Donald Trump is going to do everything in his power not to testify. I don't think we should expect him to willingly comply. Who knows, though? He may have something else up his sleeve. What are your thoughts on what will happen moving forward, especially as we've seen the committee has already, people who have not complied with the subpoena have indeed been charged. Rina?
Right. At the top of this segment, we heard the words from the president, what he's had to say about the committee and what it sort of means globally. He thinks it's made us a laughingstock. He and his supporters say that it's a political witch hunt. It's a show trial. They use a lot of language to try to discredit the work of this committee that has had 2 Republicans on it. And listen, these 2 Republicans are not coming back to Congress. Congresswoman Liz Cheney, because she lost her primary, and Congressman Adam Kinzinger, because he decided to retire. So for whatever purposes anybody has here, in talking about the committee and what it means in American history, I think we can all agree that this was really information that was revealed to the American public that was not known before. This was not information you could just go find if you did a little digging on Google. The committee did investigative work that revealed information that showed how our fellow Americans tried to overthrow our government in broad daylight and who was responsible for calling them to action. Now, I want to say this last bit here because I understand this is a lot we have to unpack, but this part is important, and it's the very fact that there is a subpoena now for the president to sit before this committee. It's up to him if he wants to comply or not. I do think a referral to the Department of Justice to indict the president would be a good thing, because what I think we've learned over the course of these public hearings is, frankly, language that means that he was the ringleader of January 6th. He was the one that called them to action. So whether or not he complies with that subpoena now is, of course, the biggest question. But I really think it's bombastic that we've learned how big the former president's role was on January 6, 2021.
And that is the point they wanted to underscore yesterday as part of what was their closing argument, essentially. So whether there's a criminal referral on the ignoring subpoena part or criminal referral for other matters related to the riot, that's a decision that they have to lay out in whatever report they ultimately come up with. Of course, with the context being that this all could go away in January if Republicans take control of the House. So a legal battle over him complying with the subpoena, they don't have the time. The clock is not on their side when it comes to that issue. Let me switch gears to another, I think, chilling headline from yesterday, which I think Americans should find disturbing. They laid out in detail, Nicole, about how the Secret Service was warned for weeks before January 6th that violence was likely, saying point blank, they're coming here to kill people. They're coming here armed to kill people. It is still amazing that the Secret Service was warned of that kind of possibility, and yet the Capitol was still able to be breached and lives lost. How concerning should we find that? And what does it mean that it's happening in the context of confiscated cell phones and missing records that also has put the Secret Service in the hot seat as well?
Yeah, it's very concerning, and this needs to really not be a asterisk or an afterthought, but something that is continued to look into as much as possible and figure out what is going on here. I mean, we saw so much evidence that there was an awareness of how large and how violent this was going to be. This was not something that just manifested itself on that day and grew and a crowd getting excited. This was a coordinated effort that we and our largest law enforcement agencies were aware of. And that is wild that the Capitol could be breached in that manner, to have this much awareness and of the planning that was going into it, and to still have them succeed as far as they went. I mean, frankly, we're lucky that it didn't go farther. I mean, these were people who were ready to commit executions. I mean, we saw video yesterday more and more of saying, bring her out, bring her out. And they were talking about Speaker Pelosi, and they would have committed serious violence against her. So this is very concerning and leads us back to a little bit of what we talked about yesterday. I mean, some points of this hearing is, yes, to put it in perspective for history, but it's also, so this is on the record, it is an attempt to try and prevent something like this going forward, to not have a disruption or the demise of our democracy going forward. Democracy is not a given. This is not something that you have and it just continues. We have history in country after country of how it gets dismantled. And it is this sort of authoritarianism from the top that creates that problem. We're a new country in relative respect of the world. This democracy is still new, and it's obviously still sorting itself out. And this is a chapter that we have to get through correctly in order to maintain it.
And Rina, I want to get back to the subpoena again, and something that Rob was touching on about how the makeup of both this committee and Congress in general is going to change in the next few weeks, months. But the subpoena was unanimous. So the two Republicans on the committee, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, did side with Democrats in this, making their break with the GOP even more clear than it's already been. So I want to take a quick listen to some of their thoughts during the hearing yesterday.
President Trump knew from unassailable sources that his election fraud claims were false. He admitted he had lost the election. He took actions consistent with that belief.
He knew he had lost the election, but he made the deliberate choice to ignore the courts, to ignore the Justice Department, to ignore his campaign leadership, to ignore senior advisors, and to pursue a completely unlawful effort to overturn the election.
So, Rina, I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on what's next for Cheney and Kinzinger, both in the immediate future and kind of how history is going to look back on them.
Well, those words were really powerful. And I think this committee's work is, as you heard from me previously, I think it's really important. And I think there are a number of Republicans out there who do think it's important. Of course, let's not forget that the Republican Party right now is really controlled by the MAGA faction. And that means something. That means that those people are really motivated to push back against what they think is the narrative from House Democrats. And so while I don't think there will be a red wave in this midterm election, I do think that it's very likely that the House is taken over by Republicans, in which case this committee, if it needs to continue its work into the new year, into the new Congress, it can't, because I believe it'll be dismantled by a Republican Speaker of the House. So that says something. With these two Republicans not returning to Congress, frankly, I don't think it means very much in this moment. And that makes me sad, because I really respected both of them and the careers that they've had on Capitol Hill. But you know, we do this as an American electorate. We tend to forget people who stood up on principle when they're no longer in the capacity that they did stand up in. So now they both get to be private citizens. They get to try from the outside to impact what they think is right for our legislative branch and for our government as a whole. But this is also important that, you know, I think the House should act before the new Congress convenes. Because like I said, I think the new Congress might be led by Republicans. It's looking very likely. And this is something that the current Congress, led by Democrats, could do. They could vote if Trump does not comply with the subpoena. They could vote to hold him in inherent contempt. And I want to be very clear what that is here. Inherent contempt is where Congress doesn't go to the Department of Justice, but they execute its own authority to hold Trump accountable. And we know that the committee has held previously people who have not complied with subpoenas accountable. So I think regular contempt, again, is what these other people who didn't comply with subpoenas subpoenas, did, they were giving criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. But the president could be held in inherent contempt, and that's something where Congress circumvents the power of the DOJ and does something itself. We've known Congress to not be the strongest body in this era, so I would be not surprised if they didn't choose to go this route, but it would be the best route for them.
And let's be clear, not complying with the subpoena, and even if he's held in contempt, is probably the least of Donald Trump's legal woes in the whole landscape of what he's facing right now. Nicole, before we end this, I do want to ask one question. I think people were riveted by those tapes yesterday of watching Pelosi and Schumer and others in the moment. It was such a sneak peek in terms of the panic that was happening that day. And you saw Pelosi scrambling to get help. You saw Schumer scrambling to get help. You saw them on the phone with Vice President Pence, who was also scrambling to get help and to get Congress back in there to do the business of the day. To me, all of that, besides just being juicy and interesting, underscored the fact that the most powerful people in our government were trying to do something to bring it to an end, while the President of the United States, for almost 3 hours, did nothing except watch it on Fox News. Do you think that the nothingness, the inaction by the President that day, is that at all an impactful message, not just for the sake of history, but with the midterms coming up and another Trump candidacy perhaps weeks away from being announced?
Well, it is chilling. Again, I think these midterms are going to be very close. I think there is a tiny amount of the electorate that could be affected by this, but there are a lot of races across the country that are very, very close. So even that little bit where maybe you were considering what side you were going to be voting on, and this sort of pushes you to see what party was doing the standing up for the American people and democracy and what party wasn't. But ultimately, I think we've seen that these midterms are going to come down to a lot of the issues that we've been discussing about inflation and the economy and the Dobbs decision. And that seems to be where the voters are at. But this was riveting. This was very telling as to what the Democratic leadership was doing that day and what party is standing on what side of history right now, as we're seeing these members, with the exceptions of Congresswoman Cheney and Kinzinger and a few other leadership in the party throughout the country, standing up against that. And the most interesting thing about Congresswoman Cheney and Congresswoman Kinzinger too is they do come from two different factions of their own party. And Kinzinger has been in Republican Main Street, a solidly moderate, self-declared moderate bloc. Representative Cheney always identified as a very far-right conservative. And it's frustrating to see that these two can stand up from these two different sections of their party for what's right here and really be left alone out there. I mean, it's astonishing that they have not had more support from their party in this endeavor to say, let's put America first. Let's put this democracy first. We can have our divisions about how to solve a tax problem at the IRS or some other policy issues, but this is what we should be united about. And that's what I think Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney were trying to make their points and push across during this committee. And hopefully more people in the Republican Party join them, because I think this is a crisis within this party. As Rina was saying, the MAGA faction is dominating it. And this is not something that Democrats can go solve for them. This is an internal party issue that needs to start being addressed.
Loyalty to Donald Trump is the ultimate litmus test in the GOP right now, and the Kinzingers and Cheneys of the world are on a lonely island. Let's be honest. But keep in mind, one last context, if Liz Cheney does run for president, you can imagine, and she's not closed that door, her work on the 1/6 committee will be her line of attack if she decides to be one of the people, one of the Republicans who challenge Trump for the nomination if he decides to run again, which of course would be another fascinating twist in all of this. Rina and Nicole, can't thank you enough. Thanks for giving us so much time on a Friday morning. Please come back and have a good weekend.
Thanks.